Christian leaders have used the fear of a common enemy to unify around a certain cause. This was true leading up to World War II with the Nazis as the common enemy, and then communism during the Cold War. This trend continued into the 90s with authoritarian leaders in the Middle East being the common enemy, and then the tragic events of 9/11 happened. Post 9/11, we saw the common enemy of Christians become Islam. But was this warranted? Muslims across the globe saw an increase in hate directed at them, and the war on terror was launched in the early 2000s. But was there any truth behind these actions against Islam and its leaders? I have my good friend David Wood to answer these and other questions. Hello, doubters. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to dive right into the conversation with David Wood. David, thank you for joining us.
Hey, how's it going, Tim?
Fantastic. So I am really excited to have this conversation because I see you, and I know that you are one of the foremost experts when it comes to Islam's and addressing the claim of Muslims. And so I'm excited to kind of dive into this with you a little bit. I think one of the things that we need to address early on is perhaps this distinction, or would you create a distinction between the Muslim next door and the teachings of Islam? And if so, what would that distinction be?
Oh, I would always make a distinction between an ideology or a religion and the person who believes in the ideology or the religion. And especially with Islam, there are going to be varying degrees of knowledge that the person has. So there, just like in Christianity or anything else, there will be people who are very knowledgeable about what their religion teaches, and there will be people who are almost completely ignorant of what the religion teaches, even though they still believe in the religion. And so just as you can have Christians and you say, hey, do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe in the Bible? They say yes, but they only go to church on like Christmas and Easter. And if you started asking them questions about theology or something like that, they would have basically no clue. You have Muslims who are like that. Okay. And so the ideology, the religion, that would be all the teachings of Islam. That person might be almost completely ignorant. They might just know, hey, we're supposed to believe in Muhammad. We're supposed to believe in the Quran. They might have no clue about Jihad or any of these other issues. And so, you can't treat that person as if that person sort of represents all of the religion. And you just find from experience, not only that there are different levels of knowledge, but also that there are people are just sort of wired differently. You have different personality types, and some people, this would be across religions, some people are going to say, once they find out that their religion teaches something, they're going to say, okay, that's what my religion teaches. If I believe in the religion, then I have to believe in that. Or if I believe in the religion, then I have to do this because that's what my religion commands. And you have other personality types who will be more inclined to reinterpret things that they don't like. Yeah. And so even if you were to show many Muslims, especially in the West, here's what your religion teaches. It calls for the violent subjugation of the world, for instance. They would reinterpret it. Or if you say, look, your prophet demanded that anyone who leaves the religion has to be executed, they'll reinterpret it. They'll say, well, what that means is if someone leaves the religion and then comes back and attacks Muslims, then you would have to find it. Like, wait, that's not what he said. He just said, if anyone leaves the religion, kill him. And so it's always easy to reinterpret the teachings of a religion, but that's what people do. You've got the teachings of Islam, and those are contained in the Quran and the Hadith. The Quran are supposedly the words of Allah. In the Hadith, you have the teachings of Muhammad. So he's considered a prophet. The Quran is supposedly the literal words of Allah. There's not supposed to be any input from Muhammad in there. But the Quran also says that Muslims have to follow the teachings of Muhammad. You find those in the Hadith. And so you put all those together, and this is where you get the major building blocks of Islam. But human beings might know more or less of that, and they might be more or less inclined to reinterpret those kinds of things. And that's why you still have to think of Muslims on a person by person basis. What does this person actually believe and do?
And so how have you found the best way to kind of draw some of that out practically? Because again, there's just this assumption that, well, someone wearing the label, we'll just say that someone wearing the label of a Muslim flew a plane into buildings, killed thousands of people. But somebody else may say, well, yes, I am a Muslim as well, but I'm not that Muslim or something like that. So how would you draw that out to kind of figure out maybe where they're at in a conversation? You're talking to somebody, they say that that they follow Islam, and you're trying to gauge what sort of things would you probe or ask, or how would you kind of figure that out?
Yeah, well, this is an important issue because you do have lots of non-Muslims who, when they find out what Islam teaches about certain issues, like calling for the subjugation of the entire world, like the various stages of jihad, that according to Muhammad, when Muslims are in a small minority and aren't able to win a violent confrontation, they're supposed to promote peace. They're supposed to say, hey, we're all about peace, right? Then later, once their numbers rise, then they are allowed to at first fight defensively.
Okay.
So someone's attacking Muslims, or even if someone's criticizing the religion, they're allowed to respond physically with violence. And then eventually, once Muslims make up the dominant portion of society, once they're the most powerful force in society, then Islam calls for offensive jihad. You violently subjugate everyone else and force people to become dhimmis, which are second-class citizens if they're not Muslims. And so once people find out that sort of thing, there is this tendency to think, oh, therefore, that's what all these Muslims believe. And if a Muslim tells me that he doesn't believe that, or that's not what Islam teaches, then he must be lying to me. That's how many people think.
Yeah.
And so when you have a Muslim saying, no, Islam's a religion of peace, there are just lots of people who think, aha, that Muslim's lying, because that Muslim must know that Islam calls for him to violently subjugate me. And for people who actually have interacted with lots of Muslims, that's not true, right? It's not true. There are tons of Muslims who actually believe that Islam is peaceful. They actually believe that Islam promotes general human rights and so on. And so there's this gap between what the religion actually teaches and what these people actually believe. And just as someone who I know a lot of ex-Muslims, I know lots of people who were Muslims and then eventually left Islam, and they don't come to me later and say, yeah, when I was telling you that Islam is peaceful, I was actually planning on murdering you because you criticize Islam. They don't say that. So they don't actually, they didn't actually believe it. So there are tons of Muslims who believe all kinds of things. And so you want to go on a person by person basis. And it can be difficult because here's the problem, right? You have tons of Muslims who actually believe that Islam is peaceful, but you do have Muslims who will lie, right? Who believe that they ultimately want to subjugate you when they get you in a position to do so. But as of right now, they'll lie about it because that's what their prophet did, right?
Right.
They even had a saying in early Islam. They say, we smile in their faces while cursing them in our hearts. So we're smiling at you, we're friendly towards you, but inwardly we're just waiting for the day when we can subjugate you. But here's the thing: you take a peaceful Muslim, a Muslim who is legitimately peaceful, and a Muslim who wants to subjugate you, but he's just smiling in your face while cursing you in his heart. They're going to say the same things, and so it can be hard. It can be kind of difficult to figure out what kind of Muslim you're dealing with. But basically, from my experience, if you're in a situation where you get to know a Muslim over time and get to become increasingly friendly with a Muslim, have plenty of discussions with the Muslim, you start getting a feel for whether the person sincerely believes what he's saying. And so you just have to figure out where that person is. And the main distinction from a Christian perspective is a person is created in the image of God, right? So that person that you're talking to, that Muslim that you're talking to, that person is created in the image of God. The Bible commands us to love everyone. The Bible tells us to honor all people. The Bible tells us to pursue peace with all people. And so you shouldn't have this hostility towards people. This doesn't mean you don't punish people who do something wrong and so on.
Right.
It means that as far as I interpret what this means about how we're supposed to live, we should kind of want the best for other people. And so if you're talking to a Muslim, you should want the best for him. And so you should want to preach the gospel to him and so on. If someone's a terrorist or something, same thing. I want what's best for the terrorist. What's best for the terrorist is you stop him from being a terrorist. You know, if you have to lock him up or whatever.
Right.
But that's a person. People are created in the image of God. People have certain basic human rights that need to be defended. Ideologies, religions are not created in the image of God. They don't have any intrinsic rights.
Right.
And that is a problem. If you're talking to Muslims, they don't tend to see that basic distinction. They think that if you're criticizing their religion, you're somehow violating their rights or something like that. And that's why you have these issues in Islam where if you draw a cartoon of Muhammad, many of them think someone has to die over that because you've criticized their religion. You've forfeited your right to live by doing something like this. So it's good to try and help Muslims understand this difference. Person has rights. Person is created in the image of God. Ideology, no. Ideologies are open for discussion and debate. But even though they might not understand that, we have to keep that distinction in mind and try to bring that out.
No, I think that's a really helpful distinction. I do want to, on the heels of that, want to talk a little bit about the legitimacy or the warrant of kind of the war on terror that has been happening over the last 20 or so years. But before we get to that, I just wanted to draw out, I know that one of the ways that you got into studying the religion of Islam and doing your ministry that is widely successful on YouTube and in person was your conversations with the late Nabil Qureshi. And so I've read Nabil's book before, and I know that some people who are watching this who are, deconstructing their faith, they're looking at, man, why do we have to go to war with Muslims? Why are we, constantly trying to create division? Why can't we just kind of, live in peace, as you're saying? So tell us maybe just a little bit, before we get to the war on terror, tell us just a little bit about some of the initial interactions with Nabil, because I know that there were some times in the recounting of the story that you were debating each other on specific topics, but then there's other times that the two of you are kind of coming together and debating somebody else. So I think that would give a good picture of maybe how to live that out, or how we should practically think about some of that. So just, spend a couple minutes and just kind of sketch some of that out, your relationship and what that looked like initially.
Yeah, so Nabil and I were both students at Old Dominion University in Virginia, and we were both on the speech and debate team. And when we would go to competitions with other schools, most of the other people on our team wanted to go out and, go to clubs and stuff at night when we weren't competing and so on. And Nabil and I weren't interested in that. And so we ended up hanging out in the hotel room together almost instantly. And so we became friends. And so every school trip we'd go on, we ended up hanging out with each other while everyone else went out and, went clubbing or something like that. And so, Christians and Muslims can have a common moral foundation. There are things that we don't agree on morally, but there are things that we do agree on morally. And so it's important. Just because you have massive differences in one area doesn't mean you don't have common ground in some other areas. So sure. Nabil and I ended up hanging out with each other, and his parents liked it that he had someone to hang out with on the trips, because they're concerned that their Muslim son is gonna, who's he going to be hanging out with and so on if he leaves home and so on. But yeah, we ended up becoming friends, and Nabil wanted to jump into discussions about Christianity and Islam almost instantly, and so we got into discussions the first trip we went on, and we kept getting into these discussions over and over again. And we would read books and then get together and talk about the book. I mean, like apologetic stuff, both for Islam and for Christianity. We'd watch debates. either on video or actually go to a debate. We went to Mike Lacona's debate with Shabir Ali, for instance.
Okay.
And so we kept getting together and we'd talk about these issues, but this was a period of years. And for the first probably 2.5 years, we focused mainly on Christian topics. So, did Jesus claim to be God? The Trinity, is the New Testament reliable? Things like that. And after about 2.5 years, then we started focusing more on Muslim claims about Muhammad and the Quran. And so we spent about a year talking about Muhammad and the Quran. And so, but it was about 4 years. It was about 4 years from the time we started having discussions before Nabil became a Christian. And that's actually can be on the fast end. I have seen Muslims who convert very, very rapidly, but I'm not sure what the statistic is right now. But as of like 20 years ago, there was a statistic that on average, a Muslim who converts to Christianity takes on average 7 years from the time he hears the gospel. So this is a long process. It's not like a Billy Graham crusade where you preach the gospel and a bunch of people come forward. So it can take quite a bit of time. But yeah, it was during that time that I had to study Islam, and I had to study Islam and start reading the Muslim sources just because Nabil was giving me arguments. Nabil was giving me arguments from the Muslim sources, trying to show me that Muhammad is a true prophet and the Quran's the word of God. And so he's giving me an argument from some Muslim source. So I started having to buy the Muslim sources so I could look this stuff up. And once I started looking it up, then I started seeing other things. And then I could go back to him and say, hey, you said this. You said Muhammad said this. But look right here in this same section, it also says Muhammad said this. You didn't bring this up. What's up with him saying this? And it was pretty cool because, after Nabil became a Christian, I actually thought, hey, cool, I'm done with Islam. Because the only reason I was studying Islam was that my best friend in college was a Muslim. So once he was done, I was actually interested in other things. And over time, I realized that Muslims make pretty cool Christians. And the reason they make really cool Christians is it goes back to what I just said about, like a Billy Graham crusade. It can be very easy for someone in the West who grew up believing in the Bible, believing in God, believing in Jesus, but never really made a commitment. Give that person a clear gospel message, and then it could be very easy for that person to say, you know what, I believe this. Why am I not committed to it? Why have I never made a decision to actually follow Jesus? For a Muslim, Muslims are taught that the worst possible sin they can commit is called shirk. It's associating a partner with Allah. So they believe that saying Jesus is Lord, which is required from a Christian perspective, that's the unforgivable sin. That's the worst sin you can commit. So we're telling them to say Jesus is Lord when that's the worst possible sin you can commit in Islam. It's worse than murder, right?
Wow.
They understand that they might have to give up their families because lots of families will turn their backs on them. And they understand that the penalty for leaving Islam, if someone should ever choose to implement it, is actually death. And so we're preaching the good news to a Muslim, and what the Muslim is hearing is, wait, you want me to believe in Christianity, which is going to get me sent to hell, and I'm going to have to give up my family, and then I might eventually get executed for this. You guys call this the good news because it sounds like the worst news ever. But so that's the negative side of Islam, that it puts these massive psychological pressures on Muslims to remain Muslims and not to question Islam. The positive side of it, though, is that once a Muslim says, you know what, I've been told all my life that this is the worst possible sin I can commit, and I may actually have to give up my family, and this may actually eventually cost me my life, but you know what, I want to know Jesus anyway. That's someone who will lay down his life for Jesus if he has to. And so that's why Muslims tend to make cool Christians. And that, along with some other issues, made me end up staying in Islam as far as dealing with it as a regular topic.
Well, I'm glad that you did, and I'm glad that you sketched out your relationship with Nabil and how some of that went, because I think it gives us a kind of a picture of to not fear. You went into those conversations saying, this is someone that I can have a relationship with. This is someone that we do have some things in common morally. We do believe that God exists. And so I think that's a great place to start, instead of this, kind of hostile, viewing every Muslim with skepticism, which again, you've rightly said that we disconnect the person from kind of the ideology. And when we're having discussions or when we're in a debate or something like that, we're really discussing ideology and what it says. So from that perspective, from realizing that there is this separation, it kind of sketch for us a little bit your understanding of kind of the war on terror. Why would Islam in general, let's just use the ideology of Islam, want to go to war with America or the West? What's at the core of those teachings, and then how they're actually played out? What's the grounding of some of those things?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, jihad actually proceeds in stages. So whatever source you go to, whether it's the Quran, whether it's the Hadith, whether it's the Sirah, these are like biographies, whether it's the Tafsir, these are the commentaries, you find that jihad proceeds in stages, meaning that what you're supposed to do as a Muslim depends on basically on the status of Muslims in a society. And so again, when Muslims are only a tiny minority of the population, they can't hope to win a physical confrontation with unbelievers. They are called to promote peace with the unbelievers. Islam's all about peace. Hey, we just want to get along and so on. Later on, once Muslims make up a bigger portion of society, 20 or 30%, then they can wage defensive jihad. So, hey, you are persecuting Muslims. Well, we can retaliate. You're even criticizing Muhammad, making fun of Muhammad, then we can retaliate. And still later, once they make up the majority of the population, then they fight offensive jihad. They actually impose Islamic law on the unbelievers and can kill, enslave, do all kinds of things to people who resist. Once again, that's what Islam teaches. I'm not saying that the Muslim next door actually believes that. Muslim next door has probably never heard of that, has probably never read the sources, and probably has no idea what Islam teaches on many of these issues. Right. But that's what it actually teaches. And so what you have is, if you look at countries around the world, they fall into that exact same pattern that Muhammad laid out 14 centuries ago. You go to places like the United States, where Muslims make up about 1% of the population. What does Islam teach, according to Muslims in America? Islam's a religion of peace. It's a religion of peace. You go to a place like Saudi Arabia, where Muslims make up the vast majority of the population. If you're not a Muslim, you're a second-class citizen, right? If you go to Pakistan, people can, carry out mob violence against you, and who's going to stand in their way, right? So wherever you go in the world, it tends to fall in this three-stage pattern, depending on the number of Muslims in society. So that's what Islam teaches. But you have very, very common in Orthodox Islamic thinking that the only person who can call for offensive jihad, actually going out and violently subjugating the entire world, because that is the goal of Islam. Muhammad said that he'd been given a vision by Allah, where Allah showed him that Islam will conquer the entire world. So people who are aware of what Islam teaches, that's the ultimate goal. Doesn't mean that you do that right now, because you might not be in a position to do that. Okay. But it's very common in Orthodox Islamic thinking that only the caliph, the ruler of the Muslim community, can call for offensive jihad against the rest of the world. But you don't actually have a caliph right now. You have people who claim to be caliph sometimes, like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS. He claimed to be the caliph of Islam. But most Muslims don't believe that you have an actual caliph right now. So they don't believe that someone can actually wage offensive jihad and say, now's when we're seizing the world and forcing everyone to submit. So what that leaves them with is defensive jihad, which they don't need a caliph. You don't need a ruler to tell you when you can defend the Muslim community against aggressors and so on. So they believe in defensive jihad, And any knowledgeable Muslim is going to believe in defensive jihad, fighting people who are oppressing Muslims, who are interfering in Muslim lands, or something like that. Well, from an Islamic perspective, a place like the United States or a country like Israel or Great Britain, these countries have oppressed Muslims in various ways in their thinking, right? They've interfered in Muslim lands. Surah 5, verse 33 of the Quran lays it down that if you wage war against Allah and his messenger, and then it gives this vague statement that if you make mischief in a Muslim land, the penalty can be death or dismemberment or something like that, right?
Right.
So from an Islamic perspective, has the United States, has Israel, has Great Britain, has France, have they made mischief in Muslim lands? From that perspective, yes. So they regard it as defensive jihad. We are now at war with you because of what you've done to Muslims. And so they view themselves as at war with Western countries. And so if you're at war with Western countries, then terrorist attacks and all of that, that's all perfectly legitimate. And so you have, even though in Muslim countries you have tons of people who just want to mind their own business and just want to live their lives, who just want their kids to go to school and don't want to be constantly fighting.
Right. You
have other people, and sadly it's a lot of people who pull the strings, who are saying, guys, we are not in a position, right? This is not optional. It's not optional. These countries have made mischief in Muslim lands and we're at war. You don't get to just live normal lives right now. This is not the time for that. We're in a state of war. And so you've got those elements in society. And I have to say, from an Islamic perspective, they seem correct to me, right? The people who are saying, no, we're at war here. I'm not saying they are correct. I don't believe in Islam. I'm saying from an Islamic perspective,
right,
it seems correct to say we're at war with the United States and with Israel and with Great Britain and with France. And therefore, the gloves are off. Terrorize wherever you can and so on. And so you're going to have this ongoing hostility towards Western nations, and could be towards other places. But the idea here is that these places, in the Middle East, for instance, or in Pakistan or Afghanistan, there are things going on there that will affect the rest of the world. Right. And therefore, occasionally the rest of the world wants to get involved. Like, hey, we don't want the Taliban ruling. Well, as soon as you get involved, because it's something that will affect the rest of the world, or just because you're trying to protect some group that's asking for help, as soon as you get involved, well, you're a target. Well, you've just declared war. And so Islam is kind of set up to be constantly in battle with everyone else. It's going to do things that are going to get the attention of other people who are worried about it. And as soon as you become involved in it, well, you're at war. And so you're just always going to have this conflict. And so we're kind of in the middle of it right now, but this is something that's been going on for 14 centuries. So once you have your prophet calling for the violent subjugation of the entire world, and you have these teachings where wherever you can subjugate someone, you're supposed to subjugate someone, and that if anyone else tries to interfere in that, well, you're at war with them too. You're just going to have a lot of ongoing conflict.
Okay, so in closing, we'll kind of wrap up here. I want to give a little bit of kind of maybe my perspective, and then you can correct where I'm wrong or agree where I'm right in this. So again, I think we've talked about the difference between the person, the Muslim next door, and the ideology. We've talked about some of the things that undergird what is an outworking of terrorism and jihad, and I think all those things are really important. So if I would answer the question, should Christians fear Islam? I don't think fear is maybe the right word, but in one sense, Christians are called to battle a war of bad ideas, is to really work against incorrect thinking and to continue to promote truth. And so in that sense, that's what we're doing. And we shouldn't fear that. We should constantly be working towards truth. And so if a religion is teaching something that's false, again, several of the things that are in Islam, that are taught by Islam, would be considered false. Even the things like Jesus not actually dying on the cross. I think those are the things that we should continue to have conversations about. Now, I want you to correct me where I'm wrong in that, if I am. But I also want you to talk a little bit in that correction, or in that agreement, if you will, about kind of the way that you choose to go about maybe going to war, if you will, if you want to consider that, you want to use that language, with Islam. Because that's what some people would say that you're doing with your ministry and on your channel, is the way that you go about addressing some of these significant issues is a lot different than, kind of the meek, mild, let's just have a conversation and let's, build a relationship with somebody, as you did with Nabil. That's one strategy that worked. But the tactic you choose to take on your channel is a little bit different. I've heard you talk about that before. I think it's excellent what you're doing. So talk a little bit about, should Christians fear Muslims? How would you answer that explicitly?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I'm not sure it's the right word. Like, I wouldn't say we should fear electricity, but you don't want to be stupid around electricity, because
I think that's good.
it can kill you. I don't fear. Well, we're just not supposed to live lives of fear, but I don't fear communism. At the same time, I do not want to be controlled by communism, and I'm certainly concerned. I'm concerned about places where communism is going to take over. So, kind of depends on what you mean by fear. If you mean
Right.
it in that sense of, yeah, I have a very healthy concern about this, and I do not want to be controlled by this, I would say yes, Christians should not want to be controlled by Islam and should be very concerned about the spread of Islam. For all kinds of ways, for all kinds of reasons, and some of which you've alluded to. Just from a Christian perspective, as Christians, we want to share the gospel with people. And if Islam is diametrically opposed to fundamental Christian teachings of the gospel, and it's very interesting, because if you look at the core teachings of the gospel as taught by Jesus' apostles in the book of Acts, when they go out, they always talked about Jesus' death on the cross for sins, his resurrection, and that he is Lord, right? So the takeaway of the Christian gospel, according to the apostles, they spent years with Jesus. He talked about all kinds of things, but the takeaway, the fundamentals of the gospel, are something about his death, his resurrection, and his divine nature. Why this is interesting is Islam claims to believe in Jesus. And if you look, they agree with us on all kinds of things that no one else agrees with us on. So Muslims believe that Jesus is born of a virgin, right? No one else agrees with us that Jesus is born of a virgin.
Right.
They believe that Jesus performed all these miracles. Atheists don't believe that Jesus performed all these miracles. Muslims do. They believe that he cleansed lepers and raised the dead and all kinds of things, right? So they believe that he lived this most miraculous life in history. That's awesome to share that belief with us. They believe that Jesus is the Messiah. They believe that Jesus is going to return again. They believe in all of these things. And yet, where they disagree, it's like Muhammad came along and he said, hey, you Christians, hey, you believe in God, you believe in Jesus? So do I. You believe Jesus is born of a virgin? So do I. You believe that Jesus is the Messiah? So do I. You believe he performed all these miracles? So do I. You believe he's coming again? So do I. There are just these three little things that we can't agree on here. He didn't die on the cross for sins. He didn't rise from the dead, and he's not Lord. Now, if we can get past that, then we're good to go. And I mean, the Christian response should have been, we have been waiting for you, because we're told that false prophets and false teachers are going to come. They're going to go after that gospel message. And you are like the perfect example of someone who, I'll agree with you on everything else, but not the actual core of the Christian gospel. And so that should be very concerning to Christians, that Islam actually teaches the exact opposite of the gospel on these basic issues. And so that's a concern. But also, as a Christian, you're supposed to be concerned about things like human rights. The Apostle Paul, when in Acts, when the Roman leader Festus wants to take him and hand him over to the Jews, and Paul knows that they're setting him up to kill him. Paul says, if I've done something wrong, I do not hesitate to die. But if I haven't, no one has a right to hand me over to them.
Right.
And so Paul actually believed in basic human rights, right? Like, hey, if I haven't done something wrong, you, even though you're the ruler here, you have no right whatsoever to hand me over to be executed. So Paul believes that people have these basic human rights. And so since we are Christians who are told to love everyone, to pursue peace, to honor all people, when we see something like Islam, which calls for the violent subjugation, it has to be a concern. Hey, here's an ideology that will not hesitate to call for people's execution for changing their religion, does not hesitate to call for the oppression of non-Muslim groups and so on. That should concern us. If we look at Islam's impact on women, my goodness, various groups, I'm not talking about groups that are hostile towards Islam. I mean, groups that do everything in their power to whitewash what's going on in the world. They still conclude, once they study the status of women in societies around the world, you go to one group and they conclude that 11 of the 12 worst places in the world for women are Muslim majority countries in terms of the rights that women have, in terms of job opportunities, education opportunities, and so on, in terms of how young they're married off, how frequently they are abused, subject to physical abuse by their husbands. And so they conclude that 11 of the 12 worst places in the world to be a woman are Muslim majority countries. Another organization concluded that 18 of the 20 worst places in the world to be a woman are Muslim majority countries. So as Christians, we're supposed to be concerned about people because we love people. And so when you see that an ideology has this impact, that's something that we need to be aware of. We need to be aware of that. We need to be concerned about that. Now, the question is, what do you do about it? Notice it kind of depends on the situation, right?
Yeah.
It depends on which thing you're focusing on.
Right.
And that's something that Christians need to get their mind around, that, hey, if I'm concerned about the impact that Islam has on people being receptive to the gospel, well, the response there is apologetics, right? That's apologetics. That's showing Jesus did die on the cross. Jesus did rise from the dead.
Right.
Jesus did claim to be Lord. He did claim those. That's the task of apologetics. And so if your concern is that, and as a Christian, you should be concerned about that, the response to what Islam does there is apologetics. If you're talking about Islam calling for the violent subjugation of the world, apologetics there can still play a role, because you want to show Muslims that it's not true. The system isn't true, and you shouldn't be going out dying for a false prophet. You should be following Jesus, right? So apologetics can play a role, but at the same time, apologetics and evangelism are not the only not the only thing that's involved there, right? If a terrorist shows up and he's about to blow up a bunch of kids, that's just not the time for apologetics, right? That's a time for a police officer or someone to make him stop, someone to stop that person from blowing up kids or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just, and I'm saying this because it's a mistake that Christians make. Like, I will respond to something about jihad or something like that, or something about, Muslims killing over cartoons or something, and I'll just blast away at the impact that Islam is having because Muhammad ordered his followers to kill people who make fun of him. And so I'll start blasting away at that, and I'll get messages from Christians. Well, David, this isn't very good evangelism. It's like, I'm not doing evangelism right now. This is not evangelism. I'm trying to convince people to stop killing for over cartoons. And I'm trying to expose Islam because it does call for this. So people who think that Islam has nothing to do with this, I'm trying to expose it. And so I'm trying to do different things. There are even other situations where, because of certain Islamic teachings, you actually have a trump card that most people don't know about in the Muslim sources. You have a trump card in the Quran where Allah orders, hey, if they're going to make fun of your religion or revile your religion, then you stop with what you're doing, right? In other words, if what you're doing is actually going to cause people to insult and degrade your religion, then you stop it, right? Now, we don't want to be running around, doing stupid stuff just to make fun of Islam. There are situations where I would do that. Like if a Muslim were saying, I've got a kid and I'm going to stab him, and I say, hey, I'll rip up your Quran if you do. That's a situation where I think you could actually do that. But there's been situations. There's a Muslim apologist named Muhammad Hijab, and Muhammad Hijab, who's massively popular, is one of the most popular online Muslim guys in the world. He actually called on all of his followers to help him in this campaign of, instead of going after people who criticize Islam, to go after our wives, right? He started raising this as an issue. Hey, instead of us harassing the Christian apologists and the atheists who criticize Islam, let's go after their wives and families. And he started doing that, and he started posting incredibly nasty comments about the apostate prophet, who's an atheist ex-Muslim, about his wife, and saying that, telling Muslims to harass her. And he's including these veiled threats of rape and torture, that once he gets it, they're gonna rape and torture her. Wow. And he's posting comments about saying that non-Muslim women actually want to be conquered by Muslim men so they can get raped by a real man. And so on. He's posting all these comments and encouraging his followers to start this online campaign of harassing the families of people who criticize Islam, going after their families with these threats of rape and torture and so on. And that was a situation where I'm sitting there thinking, no, I'm not going to let him do that when I have this trump card. Right. And so I just basically held up Quran. I held up Quran. I will eat your book. I will eat your book if you do this. And what's interesting is he stopped instantly. All of it stopped instantly. It was done, right? It was, whoa, if that's what this is leading to, we will stop this right here. Okay. And of course you get comments from Christians, David, how could you do this? How could you eat it? It was like, well, if that's the one way I know to stop a guy who's about to start going after our wives and encouraging his followers to go after our wives, it's just because at the end of the day, I don't really care about your book. And if that's the way that your Quran tells me to stop you, and that's the trump card your book gives me, that's a situation where I'll do it. Now, with that said, you have Christians who would never in a million years do that. Right. And I don't have any problem with Christian. I think most Christians should, even Christians who are concerned about Islam, you should be concerned you should be interested in evangelism and apologetics. That should be your go-to moves. Right. What's called polemics. So actually, showing that certain Islamic teachings are false. Yep. I believe that is also massively important, and it's easy to do. At the end of the day, you do need people who stop terrorists. You do need people who stop people from harassing women and so on. And so I have no problem with Christians saying, I just do this, or I just do evangelism, or I just do apologetics. And so on. Absolutely. That's what most Christians should do. But I think there are situations where you need to deal with other things that Islam causes. And I don't know. I'm a guy who's willing to do some of those things. So I'm happy to do the nest. I'm happy to do the dirt work that I don't want other people that I do, because I don't want other people to have to do it. It's like, okay, guys, do not get involved in this. Let me do this here.
Well, I think that goes to show how one of a kind you truly are, David Wood, and how much your ministry has flourished over the years because of who you are and the route that you've decided to take. So with that, I think we can wrap it up. David, thank you so much for your insight. Excellent insight on all of the work that you've done over the last few years in this area, and kind of distilling it down for some of us that are looking at this saying, I'm not really sure what to think about these kind of questions about Islam, and how do I separate the teachings from the person, and how do I deal with the war on terror, because that's not something that I really understand. I think you did a fantastic job breaking that down. Thank you so much for doing that for us.
All right.
Well, thank you for checking out this episode of Dealing with Deconstruction. If you like this episode, please go ahead and click on the thumbs up button, click on the subscribe button if you are in the process of deconstructing your faith, but you are trying desperately to hold on to your Christian faith, and you really have questions that you're seeking answers to. That's one of the things that we do a lot here on the channel. And also click that notification bell to be notified when we release new videos. I want to thank my friend David. Check out his channel, Apologetics, or Act 17 Apologetics. It's an amazing channel, and we're looking forward to seeing you next time as we deal with deconstruction.